Good morning, 8th grade history class, and welcome back to another edition of our online lessons that we're going to be posting over the next couple weeks. And today we're going to be going over section 2 of chapter 20. Yesterday we finished up section 1 of chapter 20, and you guys had some homework. Make sure that you have completed section 1 of chapter 20 as your homework, and please send that into school as soon as you finish that up so I can grade it for you all. Some of you guys are still not turning in your work. I'm talking to you, Mr. Lyle. Please make sure that you are turning in that work. I haven't received any of the map books from people either. So if you haven't turned in the map book, as of right now, those map books are late. And I am going to start marking off late points every day that I don't receive those map books. Those were due last Friday. It's been 7 days since I assigned that. So everyone should have had that turned in by now. So I'm going to start giving out zeros to people who haven't turned those map books in yet. There are several of you guys who haven't turned in the map books, and then there's others who haven't turned in the assignments from this week. If you do not turn in the assignments, I will mark you as late or as incomplete as a 0 on your Jupiter grades. So please make sure you go ahead and turn that in. Today we're going to be going over the second section of chapter 20, and then you'll have a little quiz at the end of this section. There won't be any homework tonight, just the reading and the notes. If you looked at your packet, it says for today that we were going to be going over section 2 of chapter 20. You were supposed to read from pages 323 to page 327. The section talks a little bit about the war effort and on the home front, as it's called, here in the United States, how things are changing as we're leading up to war. Basically, what starts happening is American industry starts moving to what's called wartime production. Rather than Henry Ford making cars, he starts making airplanes and tanks. A guy by the name of Henry Kaiser also wins a government contract to create what's called Liberty ships, boats that the United States Navy can use in support of its allies in Europe before entering the war. We also have the Women's Army Corps and the Navy version of that, which is the Waves instead of WACs, and it's over 350,000 women who end up joining the military as a result of this. Now, they're not going to go into combat, but they serve as nurses or helping out, clerical work and things like that. This is also the first time in American history that we see women going into the workforce in mass. A lot of men are going to Europe or to Japan or being stationed around different military bases around the United States or the world, and so a lot of job openings are open. And so these jobs have to be filled, and the people that fill these jobs are women. The only problem is when the men come back from war, the women are not going to want to give up those jobs back. And so this is how we see the slow integration of women into the mass workforce in the United States following World War II and in the early 1950s, the time of prosperity. The American citizens would do things like victory gardens, growing food in like a personal garden at home and then sending that food over for the soldiers. They would ration, not using sugar or not using steel or whatever raw materials that the government might use to help in the war effort. You would kind of cut back on that kind of stuff. Early in the involvement in the war in 1942, Dwight D. Eisenhower, later who's going to be president, is going to be the supreme Allied commander of all of the European forces. All of the Allied forces are under his command in Europe. In the Pacific Ocean, it's a little bit different, but in Europe, Dwight D. Eisenhower is in charge. One of the first places that they take on the Nazis is in North Africa, in places like Morocco, Algeria, and Egypt, and Tunisia. There is a Nazi general there. His name is Erwin Rommel. He's known as the Desert Fox, and he leads what's called the Afrika Korps, which is a German division of Nazis that are trying to take over Northern Africa and link it with the Middle East, essentially for world conquest. The United States and the British decide to meet the Nazis in the deserts of North Africa at a place called Al Alamein in Tunisia and Egypt, and actually defeat the Nazis, and then they use North Africa as a jumping off point across the Mediterranean to invade later Sicily and then Italy. This is known as Operation Torch. The man who leads the invasion of Sicily is a famous general that you've probably heard of. His name is George S. Patton. George S. Patton, there's the Patton Museum down the road here in Louisville. or towards E-Town, that you can go see. It is dedicated to him. He's a famous World War I general, a tank commander who essentially develops the tank strategies that the United States uses. And then in World War II, he's going to lead the invasion of Italy. They invade Sicily first, and then from Sicily, they jump off to the bottom part of Italy, the boot of Italy, where Naples is, and then work their way up towards Germany. In June of 1944, Rome is liberated. The people of Italy rise up against Benito Mussolini. They even arrest him. Eventually, they're going to execute him and hang him upside down in a city square in Milan, Italy. The man who leads the forces in the Pacific Ocean, Allied forces, his name is Douglas MacArthur. Douglas MacArthur is stationed in the Philippines at this time, and when the Japanese invade the Philippines, he's actually forced to flee, along with some of his men. Most of his men were forced to stay in the Philippines, and they were eventually captured by the Japanese. Many of them were killed or tortured. This was known as the Bataan Death March. As MacArthur is leaving, he promises to his men that he shall return. He says, I shall return. And at the end of the war, he actually keeps his promise. He does come back and liberate the Philippines from the Japanese in around 1944, 1945. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese on the American islands, the United States decides to launch a counterstrike against the Japanese as a result of this. The man who leads this counterstrike is named Jimmy Doolittle, and he leads what's called the Doolittle Raid, where he essentially leads U.S. bombers and attack planes from the U.S. boat, the USS Hornet, and actually launches a raid on the city of Tokyo and bombards it with incendiary bombs, causing giant fires to happen as a result. This is in response, again, to Pearl Harbor. The strategy that the United States adopts in the Pacific for defeating Japan is known as the island hopping strategy. It means you take an island, set up an air base, defenses, and bring all the troops in, build a airstrip so airplanes can come in and resupply, and then you start bombarding the next island. You bombard the next island, soften it up a little bit, launch a land invasion, take it over, set up an air base, and then move on to the next island as we get closer and closer and closer to Japan. This is known as island hopping. One of the biggest battles against Japan during World War II, again, happens in the Philippines. It is called the Battle of the Coral Sea. It is the first time in naval history where the opposing sides actually never saw each other. It was aircraft carriers that would launch airplanes from each aircraft carrier to attack the other side. So they're not actually shooting projectiles or shells at each other, they're actually launching airplanes against each other. This is known as the Battle of the Coral Sea. And then finally we have the Battle of Midway. Midway is a tiny little island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, so it's called Midway. And Midway, after the Japanese lose this battle, this is essentially the turning point of the war. Now the United States is winning the war, they're no longer losing the war. It's the Battle of Midway. And finally, we have one last battle, the Battle of Leyte Gulf. It's actually not up here. It'll be in your notes, however, though. The Battle of Leyte Gulf essentially destroys the remaining aircraft carriers that Japan has. And once the Battle of Leyte Gulf happens, now Japan is on the retreat. They're losing the war, and they pretty much defeat is inevitable for them. They know it. They're just not going to surrender for a little while. This is pretty much all the notes that I have for you guys on the war effort on the home front in section 2 of chapter 20. If you haven't taken down these notes yet or haven't done the reading, go ahead and pause that video right now to make sure that you have all of this. Again, I cannot stress enough that you guys need to turn in that work to me. I need those map books and the rest of that work that it says week 1 on your study packet for the next 2 weeks. So please make sure that you're turning that in. Otherwise, I will be marking everyone with zeros today if I don't receive that. So please make sure that you're working on that. This is all the notes that I have for you guys. And then tonight's homework, you guys give me 1 second. Oh, we don't have homework tonight. Tonight you guys just have quiz number 35. Quiz number 35 is, of course, that president's quiz. Make sure that you study it before you take it. It's not an open book or an open notes quiz or anything like that. So make sure you have all of your distractions removed before you take it. And then as soon as you finish it up, send it up to school so I can grade it for you and update your Jupiter grades as soon as possible. Hope you guys enjoyed that video. Hope you're staying safe and healthy, and I hope you guys have a great weekend. Thanks.